I remember the first time I wandered past the edge of that endless cornfield, the fog curling around my ankles like quiet fingers. The sun had already begun to melt into the horizon, leaving the sky a washed-out gray, and the faint hum of insects was the only sound that dared to exist. Between the stalks, the corn seemed to shift, not with the wind, but with something watching. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and then dimmed into near nothing, leaving only the pale light of the moon cutting lines through the mist. I thought I saw shapes moving among the tall stalks, tall, thin, impossible shapes that bent and twisted unnaturally, reflecting no light at all. My heart sank into a silence, so deep I could hear the rustling of my own breath. I should have turned back. I should have stayed in the warm glow of my cabin. But curiosity pulled me further, deeper into the fog, and that's when I saw it. The night was wet with dew. The air smelled of earth and the faint tang of something older, something hidden. I stepped into the cornfield. The stalks whispered as I brushed past them, long, hollow sighs. Moonlight barely reached through the leaves. Everything beyond the first row dissolved into darkness. A hum floated through the air, soft at first, like a distant machine, then sharper, static-heavy, vibrating under my skin. I followed it, step by slow step. The ground squished beneath my shoes, cold, damp. A pale green light flickered between the stalks. Not constant. It trembled. It called me forward. I told myself it was just a reflection, maybe a firefly, maybe a trick of the mist. But the hum pressed against my ears, and somewhere deep in the field, I felt eyes. I couldn't see them, not exactly, but I knew they were watching. Long, patient, waiting. The corn stretched endlessly. Each row seemed taller than the last. Shadows bent in ways shadows shouldn't. I felt the walls of the field close in, even as I moved forward. The hum pulsed stronger now. Electric, unnatural. It made my chest tighten, made the hair on my arm stiffen. I paused. The wind died. Even the rustling stalks went quiet, leaving only the hum and the green flicker. Something moved, faster than it should. I caught at the corner of my eye, a blur between the leaves. Not a person, not an animal, something else. I froze. The smell changed, metallic, sharp, something old and raw. I told myself to breathe, slow, steady, but my chest heaved anyway, and the static of my ears was now a voice I couldn't understand, just a thread of pressure, like the field itself was thinking. The green light danced again, this time closer. Not above me, not on the ground. In the middle of the stalks, like it was alive, I stepped forward. Leaves scraped against my skin, wet and whispering. I could almost feel the weight of eyes on my back. Then it moved again, faster than any creature should. A flash, gone. Only the hum remained. I wanted to run, but my legs refused. I wanted to call out, but my voice dissolved into the damp night. Everything felt larger. The corn, the shadows, the silence. Even the green light seemed taller, stretching upward like a finger through the darkness. I reached the edge of what I could see. The hum throbbed in my chest. The field exhaled slowly around me, rustling in soft waves. A breeze, cold and sharp, moved between the stalks. It carried something, a hint of iron, of decay, and beneath that, a faint, sweet tang I couldn't name. I felt it then, the wonder and the fear at the same time. Something vast and old, watching, waiting, and not entirely human. I took a step back. The green light flickered once more, then vanished. Only the static hum lingered. The field fell silent again. But it wasn't quiet. Not really. I could still feel it pressing against my skin, sliding through my hair, curling around my thoughts. I don't know how long I stood there. Seconds? Minutes? Hours? Time stretched like the shadows in the corn. Finally, I turned. My path out of the field was no longer certain. The corn swayed gently, almost inviting, almost teasing. I wanted to leave. I wanted to forget. But a part of me wanted to follow the hum. The night smelled of earth and secrets. And in the dark between the rows, I could still feel the eyes. Waiting, watching. Something moved again, faster than I could follow. And I knew it had been here all along. I shivered. I breathed. I wondered. and I stepped forward anyway. Fog settled low, hugging the edges of the field. Every stalk seemed heavier, dripping with moisture. The night smelled of wet earth and something older, something damp and hidden. I walked slowly along the border, careful not to step too loudly. The fog muffled my steps, but not the rustling. It was soft at first, then sharper, almost deliberate, echoing my heartbeat. Shapes moved between the corn. I thought they were shadows at first, but they lingered too long. They were almost human, but wrong. I blinked and the shapes shifted, twisting in ways a person shouldn't. Elongated limbs, tilting heads, watching me without faces. A chill rose along my spine. The rustling grew louder, syncing with my pulse. It was close, surrounding me. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my feet, through the skin of my arms. The air shifted, a sudden heaviness, as if someone or something was breathing right beside me. The fog swirled with its presence, curling around the stalks, brushing my cheeks. I swallowed, tasting damp soil and a faint metallic tang. I tried to focus on the ground. The dirt, wet and soft, pressed against my shoes, but my eyes kept flicking upward, catching glimpses of movement, something that shouldn't exist in the quiet of midnight. A stalk bent slowly. Then another, a ripple passed through the corn, like a tide moving over the surface of water. And in that tide, I thought I saw eyes glimmering faintly green. My breath caught. I held it. The rustling synced with my heartbeat again, faster this time. Closer. It was following me. I wanted to step back, but the fog made everything feel heavier, denser. Each step forward pressed against the weight of the air. I could smell damp leaves, decaying slowly under moonlight. I tried to call my own name softly, just a whisper, but it didn't carry. It dissolved into the fog, into the rustling, into the feeling of being watched from every angle. The shapes shifted again, longer, thinner, tilting in ways that didn't make sense. I blinked. They were gone. Only the fog and the low, steady rustling remained. I felt a brush of air along my neck, not from wind, a presence lingering, patient, matching my pace, waiting for me to notice. The corn swayed gently, but the movement felt deliberate. The stalks bent just enough to hide things, to let the shapes flicker in and out of view. My hands trembled slightly. Cold mist curled between my fingers. I could feel tiny droplets settling on my skin, like the fog was breathing around me. I paused. The rustling softened, almost contemplative, then stopped entirely. The fog held its breath. I held mine. Everything was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest, makes you wonder if the world is still turning at all. I realized I wasn't alone. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it anymore, but the weight in the air remained. The sense of a presence, just beyond perception, watching from between the stalks. I wanted to leave, but the edge of the field stretched farther than I remembered. The fog thickened, swallowing the path behind me. Every step forward felt like stepping into a dream where the shadows leaned in closer with each breath. I felt the dampness in the fog settle in my hair, on my skin, and smelled the faint decay of the stalks pressed together. And somewhere deep in the fog, I thought I heard something inhale, slow and deliberate. I shivered. I breathed. The shapes did not return. The rustling did not begin again. Only the fog, heavy and watchful. I moved, step by slow step. Edges of the field blurred into nothing. The air hung thick and still. Unease settled deep in my chest. I stopped and waited. The silence pressed in. The fog pressed in. The world felt small, and I felt very, very alone. And then, finally, I walked on. The fog had grown thick, curling low and heavy over the ground. Each breath I took tasted of damp soil, and something faintly sweet, almost like rotting flowers. The night felt closer now, pressing against my skin, folding the field in upon itself. A soft wind moved through the stalks. Not strong, not sharp. It carried a quiet melody. A voice? I couldn't tell. It was gentle, almost musical, twisting through the fog, repeating words I didn't understand. Or maybe words I imagined. I stopped walking. The corn leaned in with the wind. It rustled softly, brushing against my arms, wet and cold. The voice followed, curling around me, folding into the fog. I tilted my head, trying to locate it. It moved with the air, rising and falling like a song without a tune. I could feel it vibrating against my chest, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. A flicker of movement caught my eye. Slow, deliberate, a shadow between the stalks. I couldn't see clearly. The fog blurred shapes into long, twisting forms. The figure shifted, but it didn't step. It floated, almost, sliding through the fog with the wind. The voice returned, soft as a sigh. I couldn't tell if it was speaking to me, or of me. It hummed along with the rustling, like the field itself had learned a language, and I was trying desperately to understand. I took a careful step. The damp leaves clung to my ankles. The wind brushed my face, bringing the scent of wet corn, of earth, of something deeper, darker, hidden in the fog. The figure moved closer, or maybe I moved closer. Distance was impossible to judge here. Everything stretched and shifted in the fog. Shapes that should have been simple became strange and wrong. I swallowed. The voice hummed again. Soft, melodic, curling like smoke around the stalks. Sometimes it rose, sometimes fell, like it was waiting for me to respond. I breathed slowly, forcing myself to listen. The fog pressed closer, moist and cool. I could feel the tiny droplets against my skin, hear the stalks whisper with the movement of air, and taste the metallic tang of fear mingled with curiosity. The figure blinked in and out of the mist. A limb, then nothing. A head, then only fog. It wasn't human, not quite, but it held a familiarity, a strange echo of someone I might have known. The voice grew clearer for a moment, words twisted in patterns, a song I couldn't follow. I tried to answer it with my thoughts, with my breath, but it swallowed everything, leaving only the hum of the fog and rustling stalks. I stepped forward. The figure mirrored me, moving without sound, a slow glide that pressed against the edge of perception. I could smell damp earth, the faint decay of leaves, and something sharp, almost metallic, beneath it all. The wind circled around me. The voice circled too, turning over the same notes, like it had been waiting a long time for me to notice it. I blinked. The figure was gone, or I couldn't see it anymore. Only fog and stalks, swaying lightly, holding the shape of something just beyond knowing. The voice lingered, melodic, repeating, but distant now, like a memory I could almost touch. I stood still, curiosity mixed with dread in my chest. I wanted to move closer. I wanted to step back. But the fog held me, soft and heavy, and the wind whispered around me, almost gently. I breathed slowly, letting the fog slide across my skin, letting the rustling wrap around my thoughts. The figure might return. The voice might call again. But for now, everything was held in quiet, held in mist. And I walked on. The night had grown colder. Mist curled over the field like pale fingers. Every step pressed into wet earth, soft and yielding. Then I saw them, lights in the distance, flickering between the rows of corn, not scattered, careful, precise, moving in geometric patterns, like someone had drawn them in the dark. I felt drawn, pulled forward, soft and irresistible, like a moth to a flame I couldn't aim. The corn rustled around me, brushing against things I couldn't see. Leaves pressed along my arms. Something shifted just beyond the stalks, watching, waiting. The lights danced again, moving in lines, triangles, impossible shapes. My breath caught. I could smell the wet earth, the decay of the stalks, and beneath it, a faint tang of something sharp. I followed, step by slow step. The hum of the air felt heavier, vibrating through my chest. The fog curled around me, soft, thick, insistent. Shapes twisted between the stalks. Not fully formed. Almost human. Almost watching. But always just out of clarity. The light sped slightly. I tried to keep pace. The ground slipped beneath my feet, damp and uneven. The wind carried a faint metallic scent, and the rustling pressed against my skin like gentle hands. I wanted to reach out, to touch the lights, but each step only seemed to pull me further into the unknown. Then they stopped. Suddenly, the geometric patterns froze. The air lost its hum. The fog clung closer. Only the corn moved now, shifting and whispering. Silence swallowed everything else. I stood there alone. The air tasted of damp and fear. My chest tightened, heart hammering, echoing in the emptiness. I felt the field pressing in, its eyes unseen, and something in me twisted, a mix of awe and regret. I should have turned back, but I couldn't. I wanted to see what came next. I wanted to understand. The light stayed still, not fading, not disappearing, just waiting. I realized then how small I was. The fog, the corn, the silence, all of it vast and patient. And I, tiny alone, had stepped into something larger than myself. The rustling moved again, faint, deliberate, not random, not natural. Something breathed among the stalks. Something unseen, yet closer than it should be. I swallowed, tasted the iron tang in the air, felt my pulse in my throat. A shadow shifted near the edge of my vision. Not human, but vaguely familiar in movement. My stomach twisted. The curiosity that had driven me here now edged with dread. I took a hesitant step. The mist clung to my clothes, cold and wet. The lights remained frozen, geometric and unreachable. The field seemed to sigh around me, and the rustling echoed like a warning. I want to call out, but my voice dissolved into fog. The sounds of breathing and rustling became mine, or perhaps they were theirs. I could no longer tell. And then I realized a mistake. Chasing the lights had brought me deeper than I had meant to go. I had followed curiosity like a moth. And now, only fear and regret remained. The corn pressing around me, stalks bending in the windless night. Every shadow seemed to twitch. Every rustle felt like a presence brushing past. I turned slowly, wishing the lights would guide me back. But they stayed, silent, geometric, frozen in their impossible pattern. And I stood there, alone, breathing in wet earth, fog, and the faint tang of something ancient. The field seemed alive, watching, patient, and I, tiny human, fragile, could do nothing but wait. Wait for the lights to move. Wait for something to step from the stalks. Wait for a way out. But all that came was silence. And regret. The fog had thinned slightly, but the field felt heavier now. Each step pressed into soft, damp earth, leaving footprints that the mist tried to swallow. My flashlight cut a pale path through the corn. The air smelled of wet leaves, rust, and something faintly metallic. Breath left soft clouds that lingered too long in the cold night. Then I saw them. Eyes, reflecting the weak beam of my flashlight, shining with an intensity that froze me. I blinked, and pale faces emerged from the darkness. Strangely still, emotionless, they stared without recognition, without life, or maybe without thought. The corn rustled behind them, and the mist curled around their features, making them shimmer unreal. I stepped closer. The faces did not move toward me. They did not speak. And then they vanished, just like that, swallowed by fog and shadow, leaving nothing but the echo of their eyes. I took another step, and more faces appeared, each one pale, each one frozen, hovering just beyond my reach. Their eyes mirrored mine, but carried nothing I could name. The hum returned, soft at first, almost comforting, but persistent, vibrating through my chest, through my teeth, through the soles of my shoes. It carried a weight, like the field itself was breathing slowly, deliberately. The flashlight trembled in my hand. Every step forward made the hum stronger. It filled the spaces between the stalks, wound itself around my thoughts, and pressed against my skull with gentle insistence. I tried to reach out to one of the faces, step by careful step, but the moment my hand brushed the mist, the figure dissolved. Only fog remained. I could feel their gaze lingering, shifting slightly with the fog, always watching, always just beyond comprehension. The air thickened, damp, heavy, almost choking. Leaves pressed along my arms, brushing cold skin, while the hum threaded through every nerve. I want to call their names, to speak softly, to break the silence. But my voice cracked, dissolving into fog, swallowed by the vastness of the field. The faces appeared again, closer this time, hovering in the gaps between the corn, as if leaning forward just enough to notice me. I noticed their skin, pale, almost translucent, cold and wet from the mist. No expression, no warmth, as if they existed only to watch, only to reflect what I carried in my own chest. I froze. The hum deepened, a vibration through bone and blood. The field felt alive around me, twisting, shifting, folding in ways my eyes couldn't follow. I stepped backward and the faces faded. Not gone, not disappearing, just retreating, waiting in the shadows, beyond reach, beyond sense. I tried to breathe. The fog lingered in my lungs, heavy with the scent of wet corn and a faint metallic tang I couldn't name. Every inhale reminded me I was alone, yet surrounded. I whispered softly to myself, but the words were meaningless. They dissolved into mist, into the hum, into the pressing silence of the field. I turned slowly, looking for a path through the stalks. The fog thickened behind me, like it had closed itself around my trail. The faces did not reappear, but I could still feel them, pale and cold, just beyond the edge of perception. The hum softened, threading through the air, curling around my thoughts, but leaving a hollow space in my chest. I moved forward, slowly, careful not to stumble, careful not to look back. The field whispered along with my footsteps, pressing against my skin, against my mind. And I realized I was completely alone. Not safe, not understood. Just the fog, the corn, the faint hum, and the memory of pale faces that would not leave. The night held me in its quiet, and the field watched silently. Shock lingered in my chest. Isolation wrapped around me like wet cloth. I breathed and walked on. Moonlight spilled over the field, silver and soft. The fog had thinned just enough to let shapes emerge, but the air was still thick with damp and secrets. I stumbled across something strange. A pattern pressed into corn. A crop circle, fresh and unnerving under the pale moonlight. The stalks lay bent, folded carefully, not broken. The shapes were precise, geometric, almost deliberate. They pulsed faintly, a rhythm I could feel more than see. I stepped closer. The mist brushed my skin, cold and moist, and carried the scent of crushed leaves, wet earth, and something faintly metallic. Symbols moved in the fog, faint at first, twisting and curling around the edges of the circle, as if alive, or watching. The air vibrated softly, through my chest, through my teeth, through the soles of my shoes pressed into wet soil. A hum, like a heartbeat, but slower, deliberate. I crouched to touch the flattened stalks. They were cool, slick with dew. The patterns beneath my fingers seemed to shift slightly, pulsing with a life of their own. I held my breath. The fog swirled, curling around my shoulders and neck. Something pressed at the edges of the circle, unseen, patient, and I could feel it just beyond perception. I stood slowly. The circle seemed larger than before, stretching outward in impossible proportions. The hum deepened, resonating in my bones. Shadows twisted along the edges, not fully formed. Hints of movement, the feeling of being watched, of someone or something leaning in from a mist. The symbols shifted again, subtle, deliberate, patterns rearranging themselves, always just out of clear sight, always just beyond understanding. The fog pressed closer. I could smell damp soil and crushed leaves, taste a metallic tang of fear on my tongue. My heart thumped in time with the pulsing circle, an echo that made my chest ache. I wanted to step inside, to follow the pulse, to touch the symbols, to understand what had been left here in the night. But the edges of the field felt alive, bending shadows along my path. A soft, rustling pressed through the stalks. Not close, not sudden. A presence hovering just beyond the mist. Watching, patient, silent. I circled the pattern slowly, careful not to disturb it. Each step made the hum more insistent, like the earth itself was breathing around me. The circle glimmered faintly under the moonlight, a pale, greenish sheen, almost imperceptible. It pulsed with quiet insistence, drawing my eyes in, making me feel small, fragile, curious beyond reason. I bent to study the symbols again. They were elegant, impossible, twisting lines that suggested meaning, but always just out of understanding. The air pressed against my face. Soft footsteps, maybe, or shadows moving with the fog. I couldn't tell. I backed away slowly, breath foggy in the cold night, still feeling the pulse in my chest, the vibration to the soles of my feet, the silent presence watching me from a mist. I glanced back. The circle remained, perfect, untouched. The patterns pulsed faintly, almost breathing. And I realized I would never fully understand it. The hum softened. The fog curled around me, leaving the field silent and vast. I felt the eyes at the edge again, watching, patient, unseen. I could not see them, could not hear them, but I knew they were there. I shivered. The dew ran cold along my arms. The mist pressed against my face, and the moonlight made the flattened stalks glow faintly. I took a step back. The crop circle pulsed once more, and then remained still. I felt small, fragile, and entirely alone. Wonder and fear pressed together in my chest, twisting, curling, lingering. The field whispered softly in the wind. The symbols did not move again. The pulse faded. The edges of the night held me in quiet awe, and I walked on. The fog had thickened again, curling low across the field. The ground was soft and damp beneath my feet. Each step pressed into mud, leaving faint impressions that the mist tried to swallow. A low hum reached me before I could see it. Not loud, continuous, deep in a hollow between the rows of corn. I stepped closer. The stalks leaned toward the sound, bending unnaturally, brushing against my arms and shoulders with damp, deliberate weight. The hum grew, a vibration under my feet, threading through my chest and hands, curling around my thoughts. I paused at the edge of the hollow. The stalks swayed, soft and silent, but moved in ways that didn't follow the wind. They leaned closer, almost shielding something, almost holding it back. The hum shifted into something else. A whispering chant, low and rhythmic, winding around the fog, pressing into my mind like a slow tide. I wanted to step back. My feet stayed. Curiosity mixed with dread, curling around my chest, tightening. A brush along my arm made me flinch. Cold, damp, almost soft. I turned. Nothing. Only stalks swaying gently in the fog, shadows that bent in ways shadows shouldn't. I took another step, and felt it again. Hands, light, insistent, brushing past my skin, leaving goosebumps and the tang of wet leaves. Still nothing to see. Just the hollow, the fog, the chanting hum. The fog pressed closer. It wrapped around my hair, my neck, my clothes. I could taste earth and something metallic in the air. The hum pressed against my teeth, against my throat, threading into my bones. I tried to listen closely, to make sense of the chant. It twisted in loops, sometimes rising, sometimes falling, like the voices of something patient and hidden. The stalks parted slightly, forming shapes that suggested movement, not fully formed, not human. Something brushing along the edge of vision, just out of clarity, watching. I swallowed, breath fogging in the cold air. The chanting hum pulsed with my heartbeat, sinking, deliberate, slow. It pressed against the soles of my shoes, through the thin skin of my hands, around my chest. I want to call out, but no sound came. Only the hum, only the brush of unseen hands, only the fog curling tighter, holding the hollow in its cold, soft grip. I took a step forward. The hollow seemed to deepen, the stalks bending further inward, leaning as though they want to keep me inside, trapped in the vibration of chant and shadow. The fog swirled, carrying a scent I couldn't name, wet soil, crushed leaves, and something older, heavier, layered with metallic tang, pressing against my nose, my skin, my chest. I stopped. The hum softened, but the chant lingered, echoing between the stalks. The hollow felt endless. The air seemed thick, alive, and I knew I was being watched. I could feel presence at the edges. Not close enough to see. Not far enough to ignore. Something patient. Silent. Waiting. I held my breath. The stalks pressed in. The fog clung tighter. The chant wound around me. Every nerve pulsing with a dread I could not shake. Then silence. The hands vanished. The chant faded. Only the hollow remained, deep, empty, still. I stepped back slowly. The fog swirled. The stalks bent gently, almost sighing, and I felt small, fragile, alone in the vast, humming field. Dread lingered, and silence held me, soft, heavy, impossible to move through. I breathed and walked on. The first light of morning seeped through the fog. Everything felt softer, damp, and alive. The air carried the scent of wet earth, crushed leaves, and dew curling along the stalks. I noticed them first in the low light. Tiny, shimmering points of reflection on every stalk. Not stars, not fireflies, something different. They moved subtly, flickering with the sway of the corn. I stepped forward. The stalks brushed my arms, wet and cool, and the reflections moved again. They mimicked movements I hadn't made. A step I didn't take. A tilt of the head I hadn't done. I froze. The mist clung to my skin. I could smell damp metal, faint and sharp, mingling with the earthy sweetness of the morning. Shapes appeared in the fog. Not fully formed, not human. They repeated my steps. Careful, slow, almost deliberate. And then they vanished. I swallowed. The hum of the night was gone. Only soft, rustling pressed through the stalks, like the field was breathing, like the corn itself had learned to whisper. The reflections pulsed faintly in response to the sunlight, a rhythm I could feel more than see. Under my fingertips, the dew felt like liquid silk, cool and wet against my skin. I blinked. A shadow mirrored my movement. A step, a pause. Not mine, but mine at the same time. The mist curled around it, folding the space between me and the shape into a soft, impossible curve. I tried to focus, to see if it was real. But each time I looked, the shape dissolved, vanishing into fog and shimmering dew. The field seemed larger now. Endless rows stretched in every direction, each stalk glinting faintly in the morning light. The reflections moved in ways that felt alive, delicate, intentional, like they were following a pattern I couldn't understand. I felt the ground underfoot, damp, soft, pressing gently against my shoes. The air shifted as I walked, carrying a faint scent of wet leaves and something older, something faintly metallic and secret. I stopped. The reflection at the tip of a stalk tilted slowly. It mimicked the way my shoulders had slumped in fatigue overnight. A small motion, almost imperceptible. And yet I noticed it, and it unnerved me. The mist swirled, curling between the stalks. It wrapped around my ankles, my calves, my arms. I could see my own shadow stretching across the dew-covered corn, and beside it, something mirrored it imperfectly, twisting and tilting in a rhythm I hadn't intended. I held my breath. The reflections pulsed faintly, flickering along the dewdrops like tiny hearts. The shapes in the fog shifted once more, a repetition of steps I hadn't taken yet somehow remembered. And then they vanished, leaving only mist and glinting stalks. I shivered. A gentle breeze pressed against my neck. The field whispered softly, and I realized I was entirely alone, yet not. Every step I took seemed echoed, every movement repeated by shapes I could not name. And the dew, the shimmering dew seemed to hum in subtle rhythm, like it remembered the night, like it carried a memory too old for me to understand. I moved slowly, careful not to disturb the reflections. The stalks brushed my skin. The fog curled around my legs. Each breath was damp and cool. Each heartbeat seemed to echo back at me in the mist. I stopped again. The shapes did not return. The reflections shimmered faintly, holding the memory of movements that weren't mine. The mist held its breath, soft, patient, heavy with anticipation. I realized I did not want to move forward, but I could not turn back. The field had stretched itself into something endless, something alive, something that watched in silence and remembered. I breathed slowly, letting the dew slide across my skin, letting the mist curl around my shoulders. Unease and wonder pressed together my chest. The reflections pulsed faintly one last time, and I walked on. The fog had returned, soft and wet, curling along the rows of corn. The air tasted of damp earth, crushed leaves, and something faintly metallic. The field felt larger than before, endless, patient, watching. Then I saw it. A single stalk glowed faintly, pale and almost hesitant. It pulsed softly, like a heartbeat I could almost feel through my chest. I stepped closer. The stalk brushed my fingers with cold dew. The glow responded, pulsing in rhythm with my own breath. I felt warmth where the light touched me, strange and almost alive. I reached out, and the moment my fingers grazed it, images flickered before my eyes. The field shifted, bending and twisting, Rows I knew became alien. Stalks stretched in impossible angles. Corn leaves curling into shapes that shouldn't exist. I blinked. The flickering images continued, showing the field as if seen from another dimension, silent, distant, yet hauntingly familiar. The glow pulsed again. I felt the vibration in my hands, through my arms, down into the soles of my shoes pressed into wet earth. Each pulse carried a whisper, sensation being watched from everywhere at once. The mist pressed closer. I could feel droplets on my skin, cool and soft, and smell the damp earth beneath the corn. The air carried faint metallic tang, like rain on metal or the edge of something sharp I couldn't name. I stepped back. The glow dimmed, flickered, and vanished completely. The stalk was ordinary again. Only shadows remained, bending and twisting the fog. Hints of movement at the edges of my vision. I shivered. The field was quiet, but not empty. The hum of the fog lingered softly, threading to the corn, through the air, through my chest. I tried to focus on the stalk again. It remained dark, still unassuming, but I could feel the memory of the light, the images it had shown me, curling around my thoughts, impossible to ignore. A rustle along the stalks made me turn. Nothing moved. The shadows shifted just slightly, like the field itself remembered what had happened. I crouched slowly, touching the soil damp with dew. The metallic tang lingered. The mist clung to my hands. Every nerve in my body hummed with the memory of the pulse. I rose again. The glow was gone, but the sense of something watching, of the stalk having eyes in its absence, pressed against my skin and chest. I walked a few steps. The corn brushed against my arms, damp and heavy. The fog wrapped around me like a soft blanket, hiding the field's endless patterns, but I could feel them, folding around me, alive, patient, waiting. I glanced back once. The glowing stalk remained dark, ordinary, and yet I knew it had shown me something beyond this place, beyond time, beyond understanding. Curiosity pressed in, thick and insistent, curling around my spine. I wanted to see it again, to touch it, to understand the images that flickered behind my eyes. And isolation pressed in too. The field stretched endlessly. Fog, stalks, shadows. No one but me. No one who could know what I had seen. I breathed slowly. The dew soaked my sleeves. The fog settled along my shoulders, and the shadows clung gently, soft and patient. I stepped forward. The memory of the pulse lingered, a faint vibration still in my hands, still in my chest, still pressing against the edges of my mind. And I walked on. The fog had settled thick and low over the field. The ground beneath my boots was soft, damp, and uneven. Every step pressed into wet earth, leaving fleeting impressions that the mist tried to swallow. Then I noticed them, footsteps beside mine. Not mine, not familiar. Imprinted in the soft soil, close, deliberate, silent. I stopped. The footsteps paused. A hesitation in the earth itself, as if waiting for me to move again. I breathed slowly. The fog clung to my clothes, curling along my shoulders, damp and cold. I could taste the wet soil, smell crushed leaves and faint metal in the air. I took another step, and the footsteps mirrored me. Exact. Close. Every movement I made repeated beside me, pressing against the fog, pressing against my chest. I tried to ignore it, but the sensation grew heavier. The air felt thicker, the fog curling more tightly around my legs, soft, damp, suffocating. I looked into the mist. Shadows moved beyond the stalks. Not quick, not sharp. Slow, large, impossible to see clearly. Something vast, patient, shifting in the folds of fog. Every time I stopped, the footsteps stopped. Every time I moved, they echoed my pace. I could feel the vibration of them in the soil, through the soles of my shoes, threading into my chest. The corn whispered along the edges, rustling damp and deliberate. The fog pressed closer to my face. Every breath carried wet earth, crushed stalks, and metallic tang. The shadows beyond twisted, folding into one another, always just beyond clarity, always beyond reach. I slowed my steps. The footsteps slowed too, a careful rhythm, matching mine exactly, like a shadow that had weight and will of its own. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing visible, only mist and corn. But the sense of something immense lingered, watching, patient, moving just out of sight. I wanted to turn, to run, but the footsteps stopped again when I paused. The silence was not empty. It pressed against my ears, my chest, curling along my spine. The fog swallowed every other sound. I stepped forward cautiously. The earth squished softly beneath my boots. Footsteps followed, close, precise. Shadows shifted in periphery, stretching, bending, impossible to name. A breeze rolled through the field, carrying the scent of wet leaves, crushed stalks, and something metallic, something sharper than fear alone. The fog undulated with it, soft and deliberate, like the field itself had learned to breathe. I held my breath. The footsteps pressed beside mine, closer now, not human, not animal, and yet deliberate, aware, waiting. I froze completely. The fog wrapped around me like a blanket, thick and damp. The corn whispered softly along its rows, leaves brushing my arms. And the vast shadow beyond shifted, moving slowly, impossibly, bending the fog with its presence. I dared not move. The footsteps paused again. Time seemed to stretch. The field felt endless. Fog, soil, shadows pressing in from all sides. I could feel the breath of the field itself, slow, heavy, alive. The footsteps moved once more when I did, matching my pace, insistent, patient. I swallowed. The metallic tang lingered on my tongue. The wet earth pressed against my feet. The fog coiled along my arms, my shoulders, my neck. I stepped forward slowly. The shadows beyond stretched further, vast, quiet, watching. The footsteps mirrored me, soft and deliberate, pressing against the damp soil with silent intent. The mist curled tighter. The corn whispered along its rows. The field held its breath. And I, small human, fragile, walked on. Tension pressed in. Dread lingered like the fog. Soft, heavy, impossible to shake. The footsteps followed, always following. The fog had returned, curling low across the field. The early morning light made everything pale and soft. Dew hung heavy on the stalks, cool and wet against my skin. I noticed it from the edge. A row of corn vanished, not bent, not hidden, simply gone. I stepped closer. The soil was damp beneath my boots. The air smelled of wet leaves, crushed earth, and something faintly metallic. The space where the road should have been seemed to ripple, like air above hot asphalt, but colder. Still, I hesitated. The field felt wrong. Quiet, too quiet. Even the fog seemed thicker here, heavier. I stepped inside. The ground pressed softly beneath my shoes. The stalks bent impossibly, curling at angles that should not exist. They brushed my arms and shoulders with damp, deliberate weight. Everything was still. No rustle of leaves. No hum of life. Only the faint metallic tang in the air. The row stretched endlessly before me. Or perhaps the field had folded itself into an impossible shape. I could not tell. The mist clung to my ankles, my calves. Curling higher, the silence pressed against my ears. Each breath I took felt loud, echoing against the impossible stillness. My heartbeat thumped in my chest, louder than the faint rustle of the stalks. I reached out. The stalks yielded beneath my fingers, bending and curving in ways that made me dizzy. I could feel the pulse of the field, soft, insistent, alive. Shadows pressed at the edges of my vision. I turned. Nothing moved. Nothing should move. And yet, the air felt alive, watching, patient, deliberate. I stepped forward again. The ground shifted subtly beneath my feet, dew slipping softly against my boots. The fog swirled around me, and the road stretched on, endless and silent. I swallowed. A metallic tang lingered on my tongue. The stalks pressed in closer. I could feel the memory of something unseen brushing along the edges of my awareness. The row seemed to twist, curling into itself. Stalks bent in impossible arcs. Leaves brushed my cheeks, damp and soft. The field was holding its breath. And I realized I had stepped into something older, bigger, and utterly indifferent. I wanted to turn back, but the row stretched on. The edge had vanished behind me. The way I came in was gone. Regret pressed in. I should not have stepped inside. Curiosity had pulled me forward, and now I was alone. I paused. The stalks bent around me, creating tunnels of impossible angles. Every movement I made seemed mirrored in the fog, twisting, reflecting, impossible to follow. The field whispered faintly, a sound like breath across metal, like soft footsteps that weren't mine. The mist curled higher, wrapping around my shoulders, my neck, my face. I could taste wet soil and crushed leaves on my tongue. I took a careful step and felt it, presence. Something large, unseen, patient, moving beyond sight. The shadows twisted along the edges, pressing, leaning, alive. I froze. The rows stretched on endlessly, the field bending and folding into impossible shapes. The mist held its breath. The air was thick, heavy, alive. Regret and fear pressed together in my chest, curling, tightening, impossible to shake. I moved slowly, damp stalks brushing my arms, wet leaves against my face. Every step felt mirrored by something beyond sight. Every movement echoed in the impossible stillness. I swallowed again. The metallic tang lingered. The fog shifted subtly, and I realized I might never find the edge again. I breathed. I stepped forward. The rope bent impossibly around me, holding me in its quiet, patient grip. Regret and fear stretched on with me, and I walked deeper. Mist curled low across the field, soft and damp, clinging to my hair and clothes. The air was thick with moisture, earthy, metallic, and heavy. Every step pressed into wet soil, leaving fleeting impressions of fog tried to erase. Shapes emerged, vague at first, bending with the mist. Then eyes, glowing pale, reflecting light that wasn't there. They blinked in unison, slowly, deliberately. Every flash mirrored my own fear, caught and magnified in their gaze. I froze. The corn stalks brushed damp against my arms. The mist curled around my ankles and calves, soft and insistent. The earth smelled of wet leaves, and something sharper, metallic, lingered in the air. One eye stayed on me, too long, focused. It did not blink, did not shift. I felt its weight, pressing into my chest, my spine, threading into my breath. The others blinked again, together, a rhythm I could feel more than see. My heart thrummed in my chest. The fog curled tighter. Every breath I drew felt heavy, laden with damp earth and crushed stalks. I wanted to look away, but I could not. The single eye held me, patient, unyielding. The mist shifted. Shapes moved with it, soft and silent. Glowing eyes appeared and vanished, blinked and disappeared. The field seemed to stretch endlessly. Shadows leaned closer, bending impossibly, and the fog pressing, thick, damp, alive. I tried to step backward. The soil squished beneath my boots. The eye did not move. It followed, patient, deliberate, a weight in the fog I could not shake. Rustling stalks brushed my shoulders. The mist smelled metallic, earthy, alive. Every nerve in my body throbbed with unease. The blinking eyes multiplied, mirroring every motion I made, every breath, every hesitation. I swallowed. The single eye remained, focused, unblinking. My chest tightened. The fog wrapped around my arms, my neck, clinging like cold silk. The shapes moved again, faint outlines in the mist. The glowing eyes blinked in unison, echoing my pulse, measuring it, weighing it, holding it still. I tried to breathe slowly. Damp air filled my lungs. The metallic tang lingered. The shadows in the mist shifted impossibly. The stalks brushed damp against my skin. I could feel something immense beyond sight, patient, unyielding. The eye stayed. The others blinked. Time stretched, fog curling tighter, pressing against my chest, my ears, my mind. I felt utterly alone. The mist wrapped around me like a shroud. The blinking eyes mirrored my hesitation, my fear, my isolation. I took a careful step. The soil pressed softly beneath my boots. The stalks whispered along their rows, leaning, swaying, impossible angles. The glowing eyes multiplied with movement, flickering faintly, then vanishing. But the single eye remained. It weighed into me, patient, deliberate, holding me in the damp, metallic air. I shivered. Every hair on my arm stood, every nerve alive with quiet dread. I moved again. Soft, careful steps. The stalks brushed wet along my shoulders. Mist curled along my arms and neck. The eye did not blink. I swallowed, tasting damp earth and something metallic. The fog thickened, curling around my legs, pressing, alive, watching. Every blink of the others echoed my heartbeat, soft and insistent. The field seemed endless. The mist thickened. Shadows bent impossibly. The eye stayed fixed, unblinking, patient, and impossible to shake. Unease pressed against my chest. Isolation wrapped around me, dense, damp, and alive. I breathed slowly. The mist pressed closer. The stalks whispered softly along their rows. The single eye held me, and I walked on. The fog hung low, thick and cold, curling along the rows of corn. Every stalk was wet, dripping with dew, brushing damp against my arms as I walked. The air tasted of earth and something faintly metallic, heavy with moisture. Then I heard it, a quiet, mechanical hum. Soft, persistent, impossible to ignore. It cut through the fog, dulling all other sounds, my footsteps, the rustle of leaves, even my own breathing. I looked up. A dark silhouette hovered silently above the stalks. Still, unmoving, weightless against the misted sky. Its presence pressed against the edges of my awareness, making the fog feel thicker, the air colder. Shadows flickered along the rows. Not with the wind, not with my movement. They moved against it, bending and twisting impossibly, dancing along the stalks in quiet, deliberate patterns. I stepped closer, cautious, feeling the damp earth yield beneath my boots. The corn whispered along its rows, brushing against my shoulders. The mechanical hum pressed into my chest, vibrating softly through my bones. The silhouette stayed, a dark, still shape, unblinking, unyielding. The fog swirled around it, curling and shifting, wrapping the light, the shadows, the air into one soft, endless coil. I moved slowly. Each step pressed into wet soil. The stalks brushed damp against my hands, rustling faintly, as though aware of the hovering presence. The hum persisted. Soft, mechanical, cold, it made the air vibrate lightly against my skin. Every nerve in my body pulsed in response. Shadows flickered again, faster this time. They moved along the corn like water flowing against a current, bending the stalks at impossible angles. I could feel them brushing my arms, though no hand, no shape could be seen. I paused. The hum continued, steady, calm, persistent. The silhouette above remained dark against the fog sky, holding me beneath it, quiet, patient, observing. I tried to focus on the ground. The earth was damp, pressed under my boots, the stalks soft and whispering. The mist clung to my clothes, my hair, folding around me like a soft, wet blanket. I looked back up. The silhouette had shifted, just slightly. It moved with the hum, tilting again, and the shadows along the rows flickered more urgently, dancing, folding, impossible to follow. A metallic tang lingered in the air. Dew dripped onto my skin, wet and cold. The fog wrapped tighter around my ankles, pressing, alive, insistent. The hum vibrated through my chest, soft, constant, impossible to ignore. I felt a pull, curiosity curling through the fear. I wanted to understand it, to reach for it, to know why the field bent itself against the wind, why shadows move a mind of their own. But dread pressed in too. The silhouette was patient, the fog thick, heavy. The stalks brushed along my arms and shoulders, wet and deliberate, whispering secrets I could not hear. I stepped forward, then paused. The silhouette hovered. The hum persisted. Shadows flickered. I swallowed. The metallic tang lingered on my tongue. The fog curled higher, wrapping damp along my neck and shoulders. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing, following, patient, deliberate. The hum remained, steady, soft. The dark silhouette held above, watching. Shadows moved against the wind, twisting, impossible, alive. I breathed slowly. Damp earth pressed beneath my boots. Corn brushed softly along my arms. Mist curled around my ankles. Curiosity pressed against dread. I wanted to follow it, to understand it. And yet, I stayed, quiet, watching, as the silhouette drifted silently above, shadows dancing in the fog, mechanical hum pressing softly against the field, against my chest, against my pulse. I walked on slowly, fog wrapping tighter. The hum, the silhouette, the shadows, they moved together, patient, deliberate, and I could do nothing but follow. Fog curled low across the field, damp and clinging, wrapping the corn in a soft, gray haze. The earth was wet beneath my boots, pressed and yielding, smelling of moss and crushed leaves. The air was cold, heavy, and still. Then it appeared. A barn, abandoned, dark wood, weathered, leaning slightly. It had not been there moments before, or I had not seen it. The doors creaked open, slow, deliberate, as if inviting me inside. A draft rolled outward, carrying dust and something metallic, soft whispers curling in the edges of the air. I stepped closer. The wet soil pressed beneath my boots. Corn stalks brushed damp against my arms. The fog wrapped around me, curling higher, pressing against my face, my shoulders. Inside, shadows shifted. At the edges of vision, impossible shapes, bending, folding, moving just beyond recognition. Static whispers echoed softly, like old radio signals, broken, half-formed, curling along the wooden beams. I could not make out words, only tones, rising and falling like breath. I paused at the doorway. The air smelled of dust, wet wood, and something sharper, metallic, tingling along my tongue and nose. The doors creaked again, softly, pushing outward with slow, deliberate rhythm. The barn seemed alive. The shadows moved with it, stretching along the beams, folding across the corners, pressing lightly against the edges of the fog. I stepped inside. The floor was cold, damp, with slick beneath my boots. Dust swirled along the air, clinging to my skin. The whispers rose slightly, curling like smoke, threading to the beams, the corners, the air itself. Shapes shifted in the dark. Impossibly tall, impossibly thin, folding and bending in ways the mind could not follow. Every corner I glanced toward held a moving shadow, a shape just beyond recognition. I breathed slowly. The whispers pressed in closer. Static, broken, soft, deliberate. They seemed to echo my heartbeat. The fog followed me, curling under the doors, pressing damp against my ankles. The barn creaked again, doors shifting slightly. Though I had not touched them, the shadows moved with it. The air vibrated softly, metallic tang lingering in each breath. I stepped further inside. Wood groaned softly beneath my weight. The fog clung, curling higher, pressing around my neck and shoulders. I felt the presence of something immense, patient, deliberate, just beyond the edge of sight. The whispers rose again, soft, static, impossible to follow. The shapes shifted at the corners of my vision, a brush of movement, a folding shadow, like the barn itself breathed around me. I paused. The doors swayed slightly. A cold draft pressed inward, carrying whispers and damp, metallic tang. The floor pressed under my boots, steady, insistent. The air seemed to hold its breath. I wanted to leave. The shadows moved softly. The whispers followed. The barn watched. Every movement I made was mirrored in the folding dark. I swallowed. The metallic tang lingered on my tongue. Dust pressed to my nose and throat. The fog curled under the doors and along the floorboards. I stepped back toward the doorway. The barn was patient, silent, dark wood and shifting shadows. The whispers lingered, curling softly around the beams. Static in air, pressing against my chest, pressing into my skin. I paused. One last glance inside. The shapes shifted at the edges of vision, folding and twisting, alive and deliberate. The whispers faded softly, leaving only the metallic tang, the cold wood, and the still, damp fog. I stepped out. The doors closed slowly behind me, creaking softly, pressing the silence into the air. Fear lingered. The field felt emptier, quieter. The fog wrapped damp around my ankles and calves. The barn waited. I walked on, leaving whispers, shadows, and cold, dark behind. The night was still. Thick fog pressed along the rows of corn, curling damp around my boots and ankles. The air smelled of wet earth and cold metal. The corn rustled, soft at first, whispering along its stalks. But the wind, there was none. I froze. The sound pressed against my ears, weaving through the fog. Every stalk swayed, brushing damp against my arms, yet the air held still, heavy, unyielding. A presence brushed past me, cold, insistent, faint hum vibrating along my spine, pressing softly against my chest. I swallowed. The metallic tang lingered in my mouth, and the fog clung tighter, curling along my neck and shoulders. Shadows stretched long across the field, bending impossibly. I moved cautiously. Every step pressed into soft, wet soil. The stalks whispered and rustled, brushing along my sides, as if aware of each movement, folding, bending in impossible angles. The hum followed me, soft, persistent, low, threading to the fog and damp earth. I could feel it vibrating against my ribs, pressing cold along my collarbone. Shadows flickered. They stretched across the field, leaning against each other, folding and twisting against the moonlight. Each movement was deliberate, unnatural. I paused. A stalk brushed my arm, wet and soft. The hum lingered, rising slightly, threading around my ears, wrapping around my chest, curling along my spine. I looked around. The field seemed endless. Shadows bent against the lines of corn, dancing softly in the fog. The air was still yet alive. Cold pressed against my face, brushing along my neck and hair. I tried to follow the rustling. It moved against me, soft, deliberate, impossible to track. The hum pressed deeper into the field. Every stalk vibrated slightly under its invisible weight. Shadows twisted with rhythm, bending and folding in impossible shapes. The mist clung to my skin, damp, heavy, insistent. I stepped forward slowly. The soil squished beneath my boots, wet and sticky. The corn whispered along its rows, brushing my arms, my shoulders, my face. The hum followed, low and insistent, pressing against every breath I drew. I shivered. The shadows moved faster, stretching longer, folding across the fog like soft silk, leaning impossible, deliberate. The cold presence lingered close, brushing along my calves, along my back, insistent, impossible to see. I tried to steady my breathing. The rustling pressed against me, echoing my pulse. The fog curled along the stalks, pressing damp against my hands, my boots, my skin. I wanted to turn, to leave the field, but the hum and rustling followed each step. Shadows twisted with each motion, bending in impossible ways, pressing close, patient. The cold lingered. The hum vibrated softly through the fog, threading along my chest and ribs. Shadows stretched impossibly long. The corn whispered and folded along its rows. I stepped back. The soil squished beneath my boots. The mist pressed closer, damp along my shoulders, weaving around my neck and arms. The hum lingered, insistent. The shadows moved without wind. I swallowed. The metallic tang lingered in the air. The fog clung tight. Every stalk brushed against me, soft and deliberate, like the field itself was alive. Dread pressed in. Regret curled quietly in my chest. The rustling continued, and the cold presence lingered, soft, deliberate, patient. The shadows bent. The fog held tight. I walked on slowly, leaving a trail of wet footprints behind me, and the hum followed still, threading through the still, impossible night. Fog wrapped the field in thick gray. Every stalk was wet, brushing damp along my arms and face. The earth smelled cold and metallic beneath my boots. A dim, green light hovered ahead, soft, pulsing. It cut through the fog like a quiet heartbeat. I stepped closer. The wet soil pressed beneath my boots. The stalks whispered against me, brushing damp along my shoulders. The fog clung, heavy, curling along my neck. Shapes emerged slowly, elongated, unhuman. They moved with the light, bending impossibly, folding along the mist. I felt drawn toward it. Curiosity pressed against fear. My pulse thrummed in my ears, each step forward echoing against a quiet, damp field. The green light pulsed again. Shadows flickered, stretching long across the wet earth. The air smelled faintly of ozone and cold metal, tingling against my tongue and nose. I stepped carefully. Every stalk brushed damp along my arms. The fog curled around my boots and calves, pressing soft, insistent. The shapes moved at the edge of my vision, twisting, bending, impossible. The light hovered, soft, insistent, pulsing. I could feel it drawing me in, pressing against the fog, the stalks, the earth. The shapes became clearer, tall, thin, elongated in ways my mind could not follow. They moved slowly, bending and twisting with the light. Every step I took pressed went into the soil. I paused. The fog pressed tight along my chest and face. The light pulsed again, soft, green, unrelenting. Shadows folded along the stalks, stretching impossibly long. I moved forward. The stalks whispered along my sides, brushing damp, soft, deliberate. The light pulled me, curiosity pressing forward, fear pressing just behind it. A faint hum lingered in the fog, soft, impossible to place. It vibrated lightly along my ribs, threading to the wet air, pressing damp along my skin. The shapes twisted again, bending, leaning, impossibly tall. Their movements were deliberate, patient, folding along the pulsing light. The fog clung tighter, pressing cold against my neck, shoulders, and face. I could not look away. The green light hovered, pulsing softly, and the shapes followed its rhythm. The corn brushed against me, wet and soft, whispering along each step I took. I swallowed. The metallic, cold tang lingered in the air. My boots pressed wet soil beneath me. The shapes moved in slow, deliberate patterns, folding, bending, alive in the fog. The light pulsed again, soft, insistent. My pulse throbbed along with it. Curiosity pressed forward, fear pressing tight behind it. The air smelled damp and metallic, and the fog curled around my ankles, soft and deliberate. I stepped closer. The shapes became more distinct, elongated limbs folding impossibly, bending against the fog, moving with the green light. I wanted to touch it, to understand it, to know why it hovered, why the fog moved, why the shapes bent impossibly. But fear pressed against me, soft, insistent, wrapping damp along my shoulders, along my neck. The light pulsed again. Shadows stretched impossibly. I paused, breath soft in my chest. The fog pressed tight. The stalks whispered along their rows, brushing damp against my arms. The light hovered, shapes folded along it. Impossible, patient. Curiosity pressed forward. Fear lingered behind, tight and patient, as I stepped slowly into the pulsing glow. Fog pressed along the rows of corn. Damp curls around my boots, heavy in the quiet morning air. The earth smelled of wet soil and faint decay. The stalks swayed, softly, almost imperceptibly. A whistling rose with their movement, gentle and distant. I paused. The melody seemed familiar, faint, like a memory half forgotten. It threaded through the fog, curling around my ears, my chest, my spine. Each stalk bent slightly, brushing damp against my arms. The whistling grew louder, soft but insistent. It pressed through the mist, folding along the rows, folding along me. Shadows moved in time, stretching, folding, leaning against each other. The fog pressed tight around my neck and shoulders. Every step I took pressed went into the soil. I stepped forward cautiously. The whistling swirled along the stalks, soft, familiar, impossible to place. The air smelled faintly metallic, and the fog clung to my skin, damp and insistent. The stalks swayed again. Each movement a note, a thread in the melody. The shadows twisted in time, bending and folding with the rhythm of the whistling. I swallowed. The damp pressed along my face, heavy and insistent. Every stalk whispered against my hands, folding soft, brushing damp along my arms. The melody threaded deeper, familiar, impossible, curling through my memory. The shadows folded closer. I could feel the field itself leaning toward the sound, pressing damp along my boots, along my arms, along my chest. I moved carefully. The whistling pressed along each step. Shadows shifted, leaning, twisting, following the rhythm with deliberate patience. The fog curled tighter, damp along my neck. The melody pressed closer. I could almost hum along, almost remember where I had heard it before. The stalks bent soft against me, brushing damp, insistent. The air smelled metallic and wet, heavy along my tongue and nose. Shadows moved again, slow, deliberate, folding along the rhythm of the whistling. Each bend and twist felt alive, intentional, patient. The fog pressed tight along my shoulders, curled around my boots, insistent and damp. I paused. The melody wrapped along the rows of corn, pressing along each stalk, threading along the damp soil beneath my feet. The shadows leaned close, folding impossibly, moving with deliberate precision. I stepped forward. The whistling rose slightly, curling around my chest and ears. The stalks brushed damp along my arms. Shadows twisted and folded, leaning along the melody, slow, impossible, deliberate. Curiosity pressed forward. Wonder threaded along the melody, threading tight against the shadows, the fog, the damp. I could feel it pulling me closer, pressing damp along my skin, soft against my shoulders, tight around my neck. The stalks bent again. Whistling rose in soft arcs, familiar and impossible. The shadows stretched long, folding against each other, leaning along the rhythm, alive in ways I could not follow. I wanted to touch the melody, to trace it through the fog, to follow it through the bending shadows. The damp pressed heavy along my boots, my arms, my chest. The whistling lingered, soft, insistent, impossibly familiar. The stalks swayed gently, brushing along me. The fog clung tight, damp and cold. Shadows twisted with the sound, folding impossibly, deliberate, alive. I stepped slowly through the rows. The melody wrapped along me, pressing against my chest, curling through my spine. The stalks brushed soft and damp. Shadows bent with each note, alive in impossible ways. Curiosity pressed tight against fear. The whistling pulled me forward, threading through the fog and shadows. I could feel the field alive, soft, deliberate, patient. I paused again. The melody lingered. The fog clung, heavy, damp, insistent. Shadows bent impossibly along the rhythm. The stalks whispered, brushing soft against my arms. Wonder pressed forward, unease pressed behind, and I stepped slowly into the bending, whistling field. Fog pressed thick along the rows. The earth was damp beneath my boots, soft and cold. Every stalk brushed against me, wet and insistent. Then a clearing, sudden, empty, but not empty. Symbols were etched into the soil. Strange, circular patterns. Lines twisting in ways my mind could not follow. The wet earth smelled metallic, cold along my tongue and nose. A low hum filled the air, soft, vibrating, curling around the clearing, pressing along my chest and ears. It felt alive, patient. I stepped forward. The stalks whispered behind me, brushing damp along my arms and shoulders. The fog pressed tight around my neck. Each step pressed wet soil beneath my boots. The symbols pulsed faintly, or maybe it was a hum, pressing against my senses. Impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Something watched. I could feel in the fog, pressing along my back, along my shoulders, soft, patient, deliberate. I paused. The hum wrapped around the clearing, threading along the etched lines. The fog curled low along the soil, pressing damp and cold against my ankles. The stalks whispered behind me. Every rustle echoed in the thick air. The symbols seemed alive, folding along the hum, pressing along the fog, wrapping tight around my senses. I stepped closer. The wet soil pressed beneath my boots, soft and yielding. The hum pressed along my ribs. Something shifted in the fog. A presence, just beyond sight, patient and silent. The clearing seemed impossibly still. Shadows leaned along the edges. The fog curled around them, pressing damp along my neck and chest. I could feel eyes, impossible and patient, watching from beyond the haze. I knelt, hand hovering above the etched symbols. They were cold to touch, the soil pressed soft and damp. The hum vibrated along my fingers, threading into my bones. I could not look away. The symbols pulsed faintly, folding along the rhythm of the hum. Shadows leaned closer, pressing against the fog, stretching impossibly long, deliberate. The clearing held its silence. The fog pressed tight along my face and shoulders. Every stalk around the edge whispered, brushing damp against my arms. The hum lingered, soft, patient, insistent. I stood slowly. The clearing seemed larger than it should, the fog heavier, colder. Something watched. Soft, patient, impossibly still. I stepped back. The wet soil pressed soft beneath my boots. The stalks whispered along the edge of the clearing, brushing damp against my arms. The hum threaded along my chest and ears, soft, vibrating, impossible. I could feel eyes in the mist. Blinking, patient, deliberate. They pressed along the fog, folding along the symbols etched in the soil. I wanted to turn, to leave, but my feet pressed into wet earth, frozen. The clearing stretched impossibly. Shadows leaned along the edge, folding against the fog. The hum pulsed faintly. Cold pressed along my neck and shoulders. I moved slowly backward. Every step pressed wet soil beneath my boots. The stalks whispered behind me, brushing damp along my arms and chest. The fog clung tight, pressing along my skin, insistent. I paused at the edge. The clearing stared back, patient. Symbols etched into wet soil. The hum lingering in the thick, cold fog. Eyes pressing from beyond, watching, still silent. I could not stay. Fear pressed along my chest, tight, insistent. The fog swallowed the clearing slowly, the hum fading but lingering in my bones. The stalks whispered behind me, soft and damp. I stepped away. The clearing receded, but the eyes remained patient, impossible, watching from beyond the fog. Silence pressed after me, thick and cold. The wet soil left prints beneath my boots. But the clearing held its secrets, and I carried its hum inside me. Fog hugged the corn. Thick, damp, cold along my arms. The air tasted of wet soil and mist, heavy and metallic. Then it appeared, a shadow drifting above the stalks. Slow, weightless, like smoke curling in slow motion. It moved without reason, defying the pull of the earth. Every time I blinked, it shifted. Every time I drew breath, it lingered. I stepped closer. The stalks pressed damp against my legs, rustling without wind, soft and insistent. The shadow paused. I looked directly at it, frozen in place. Impossible, patient, deliberate. My heart pressed against my ribs, tight, insistent. Mist curled unnaturally around it, whirls twisting slow and deliberate, pressing cold along my neck. It hovered just above the corn, shadows stretching, impossible, unreal. I swallowed. The air tasted thick with damp and fear. The shadow swayed slightly, bending along the mist. Shadows of the stalks flickered across it, but it was no reflection. I reached forward, almost on instinct. The fog pressed along my fingers, cold, wet, insistent. The shadow responded, slow, deliberate. It paused again, as if studying me, measured, impossible. I stepped closer still. Soft rustling pressed around me, like the stalks themselves were breathing. The shadow drifted, not with wind, not with reason, but with purpose I could not name. The mist thickened, curling tighter around the stalks. It twisted along the shadow's edges, soft, damp, and impossible to hold. The air pressed into my lungs, tight, heavy, aware. I could feel its gaze, though it had no eyes. A presence patient, folding along the floating dark. I shivered, cold pressing along my shoulders. It paused when I stared, frozen in the thick fog. The stalks leaned slightly toward it, as if drawn by some invisible weight. The shadow hung, impossible and still. Then a shift. It moved too fast to follow, threading between the stalks like liquid shadow. The mist bent unnaturally along its path, pressing damp and cold against my skin. I stepped forward again. The soil pressed wet beneath my boots, thick with dew and cold. Every rustle whispered, soft, insistent, impossible. The shadow hovered, then vanished in a blink. The fog pressed around me, dense and silent. I blinked, trying to see it again. Nothing, only the stalks swaying gently, their tops wet with dew, rustling softly without wind. The air hummed faintly, like the echo of something that had just passed. The chill pressed along my spine, a reminder of the shadow, patient and impossible. I moved slowly, every step careful on wet soil. The fog thickened along the edges of the clearing, pressing along my neck and shoulders. The shadow was gone, but its presence lingered. I could still feel above me, weightless, patient, watching. The mist curled and twined where it had passed, cold, damp, and impossibly alive. The rustling pressed around me again, soft, insistent, as if waiting. I stopped. The clearing was empty, but the air remained thick, dense with something unseen. I could feel it fold into the fog, pressing damp along my skin, pressing along my chest and lungs. I turned slowly. The stalks whispered behind me, shadows bending in impossible ways. The earth pressed cold beneath my boots. I tried to convince myself it was gone, that the shadow was nothing, but the mist moved differently now, curling along the path it had traced, pressing weightless against the stalks. I could feel it still, patient, impossible, waiting. I stepped back, fog pressing damp along my chest. The air hummed faintly. The shadow folded into memory, impossible to touch, impossible to see. And yet, I could feel it, still hovering, still waiting, patient above the corn. Silent, weightless, impossible. I left the clearing slowly. Every step pressed wet soil beneath my boots. The fog followed, dense, heavy, aware, and the memory of the floating shadow lingered, pressing along my chest, folding along the mist, impossible, patient, unforgettable. Fog clung low to the ground. Cold dew pressed along my boots. The air tasted damp, heavy with the scent of wet earth. The field was still, too still. Not a leaf stirred. Not a single rustle moved through the rows of corn. And then I noticed it. One stalk, alone in the dim light, swaying slightly though the air was calm. Closer than the others. Closer than it should be. I stepped forward. Soft pressure of wet soil beneath my boots. A chill brushed along my neck. The stalk seemed to lean toward me. I froze. A whisper grazed my ear. Impossible words. Urgent. I couldn't understand them, but I felt the meaning pressing, insistent. I swallowed. The mist curled around me, damp and thick. Every other stalk stayed rigid, unnervingly still. No rustling. No life. The whisper came again. Closer, clearer, yet still unintelligible. It vibrated along my skin, cold and damp, folding along my shoulders like a weight. I reached out. The stalk shivered beneath my fingers, wet and cold. The whisper pressed into my ear, urgent, insistent, shaking along my chest and jaw. I drew back slightly. The rest of the field remained quiet, breath visible in the chill air. I could see the faint mist twisting along the rows, bending along the edges of the stalks. The whisper slowed, pausing, pressing. The urgency lingered like static in the fog, coiling tight along my spine. I leaned closer. The words brushed my ear, soft, damp, impossible to catch. And yet, I understood everything at once. A warning, a demand, a question I could not answer. The stalk quivered, leaning impossibly toward me, shadow pressing along the base of its leaves. The mist curled thick around it, pressing damp along my boots, tight along my calves. I stepped back. Every other stalk remained motionless, their edges trembling only as the fog shifted. I realized I was utterly alone, the field silent, the whisper coming from that one impossible stalk. I tried to pull my gaze away, but the stalk leaned closer, its movement subtle, deliberate, patient. The whisper rolled along my cheek, soft, damp, urgent, unintelligible. The fog thickened suddenly. Every breath tasted cold, metallic. The stalk pressed close in the dim light, and I felt the weight of it, the presence it carried beyond sound or shape. I stepped back again. The whisper faded slightly, but it remained, curling along the edges of my mind. Every other stalk stayed still, silent, and empty, as though they were waiting, watching, obedient to some unseen rule. I turned my head, tried to escape the sound. The whisper followed, curling tight, urgent, insistent, pressing damp along my jaw. I could feel the mist pressing close. The weight of the field around me, still, silent, patient. The stalk trembled slightly, as if breathing along with me. The whisper pressed again. I stepped back. The urgency remained, unintelligible, and yet I understood the message in the cold mist, the wet soil, the silence that stretched across the rows. I moved slowly, every step careful, measured, boots pressing cold into the ground. The stalk swayed softly, leaning toward me, shadow bending along the damp edges. The whisper followed, curling, pressing, a reminder that the field was not empty. I left the stalk behind, but the memory of its whisper pressed along my ear, along my skin, impossible, insistent, damp with mist. The rest of the field remained still, silent. I turned once more. It stood there, patient, impossible, waiting in the fog, and I felt it fold into the air behind me, pressing along my back as I walked. Unease clung to me, heavy and cold, and regret settled like dew along my shoulders. The whisper lingered in my mind, folding along the edges of memory, pressing damp and impossible, and the field remained silent. The fog hung low. It tasted damp and metallic. The field felt empty, but the silence pressed close. I noticed it first as a chill, not the kind that seeps gradually, but sudden, sharp, biting along my neck. I pulled my jacket tighter, but the air only grew colder. Breath curled in front of me, and then another followed, warm, soft, almost like mine, mirroring each exhale. I froze. Alone or not, shadows flickered in the mist, elongated shapes bending along the edges of the stalks. I thought I saw figures move in time with the wind, but the air was still, static pressed against my ears. A soft hum, impossible place. I stepped forward, boots pressed damp into the soil. Each footfall sounded swallowed by the thick fog. The warm breath came again, closer, rubbing against my shoulder, though nothing touched. A stalk trembled nearby, not from wind. There was none. It bent, curved impossibly toward me. The shadow at its base flickered, then vanished. I held my breath. Cold pricked along my cheeks. The fog seemed heavier now, clinging to my boots, sliding damp along my sleeves. The mirrored breath drew closer. I could feel it curl along my back. I turned. Nothing. Only mist rolling along rows of corn. Only shadows that shouldn't move. The shapes flickered again. They appeared far off, then closer, then gone entirely. Each blink of vision left a residue of unease, curling tight along my spine. I whispered my own breath, hoping it would match the rhythm of the other, hoping it would stop the pressing, but the warmth stayed, folding along my collarbone, insistent, patient. The stalks pressed in closer. The fog shifted with them, coiling along my boots, my calves, clinging to the damp earth. Each movement was deliberate, but there was no one there. I reached toward a flickering shape. Mist slid along my fingers, cold and wet. The figure dissolved instantly. I could feel its absence, weight pressing where nothing remained. A faint hum rolled along the field, static, almost musical, undulating to the fog and the chill. I tried to follow it with my eyes. I wanted to see something solid, anything to explain the mirrored breath, but the field remained empty. The cold pressed harder. It slid beneath my jacket, against my spine. I shivered, and the warm breath mirrored the tremor, so close it felt alive. I turned slowly, expecting, dreading. Mist curled around my ankles. Shapes flickered. One remained longer than the others. A shadowed figure, watching, then dissolving. Silence fell suddenly. The warm breath was gone. Only the cold remained, pressing damp against my skin, sliding along the soil, curling tight along my chest. I exhaled slowly, felt the weight of being utterly alone. The fog rolled along the rows. Shadows twisted in time with nothing. Everything was still. I stepped forward, boots pressing wet into the mud. Each stalk seemed to lean, as if listening. The fog pressed against my face. A whisper of warmth brushed my cheek, a reminder that I was followed, even if unseen. I turned back toward the edge of the field, hoping, needing, for something solid, something real. But the fog hid everything. I moved faster. Cold wrapped around me, damp and biting. The mirrored breath vanished entirely. Stillness returned, but I knew it lingered, somewhere beyond the mist, watching, waiting. The field remained empty, silent. I pressed on, breath shallow, heart tight. Fear curled along my shoulders, and isolation settled deep like dew in the soil. Nothing moved but the fog. Nothing breathed but me. And somewhere, just beyond vision, a warmth had mirrored mine, a presence that would not leave, that would wait in the silence, I left the stalks behind. The fog swallowed the field, and I felt it there, folding tight around the edges of memory, heavy, impossible, cold. The morning fog lingered low. It smelled of wet earth and corn. The field stretched endlessly, but something was different. A spiral, perfect, corn bent inward, curling toward a hidden center. Each stalk leaned as if drawn by gravity or by something unseen. I stepped closer, boots pressed into damp soil. The spiral seemed alive, breathing with the fog. A faint hum vibrated through the air, soft, constant, pressing against my ears. I moved along the curve. Footsteps echoed strangely. Time shifted. A minute felt like an hour. The sun hung in one place too long, then slipped faster than I expected. Shadows clung to the spiral's edges. They mimicked my every move, sliding along stalks, bending as I bent, folding into the spiral itself. I could feel their eyes, though none blinked. I paused. The fog thickened, sliding along my collar, damp against skin. The spiral seemed wider, taller. The stalks curved impossibly, forming arches and tunnels of green. I moved again. A soft rustle followed each step, though no wind stirred. The hum grew lower, vibrating through the soles of my boots. Shadows shifted closer, folding into the spaces between stalks. I tried to trace the spiral outward. It seemed endless. I turned a corner, then another. The same footprints I had left were already there, or maybe new ones. I could not tell. The spiral bent light oddly. The fog glowed faintly pale, casting long shapes along the ground. Each step felt slower than the last. A rhythm to the spiral, a pulse I could not escape. I stopped, breath visible in the damp air. Shadows hesitated with me, then mirrored each inhalation, folding tight into corners of fog. I pressed forward. The center of the spiral seemed near, or perhaps it had moved. Time felt liquid, slipping over my shoulders. My own shadow stretched impossibly long, then split, bending away from me, following some unseen geometry. I felt vertigo. A low static hummed through the spiral. I wanted to step back. I wanted the field to be normal again, but the spiral pulled, curved perfect, insistent. A shape appeared at the spiral's heart, pale, elongated, as if made of mist and shadow. It moved with my steps. I stepped left, it mirrored right. I stopped, it bent closer. A presence, but unseen entirely. The air thickened, damp and earthy, heavy with that hum. I pressed my palms to my thighs. The stalk swayed gently, bending as if breathing around me. I walked the spiral slowly. The pattern felt alive, pushing me toward the center, yet folding me outward at the same time. Shadows shifted again, folding into themselves. Eyes. If there were eyes, tracking everything. I reached a clearing in the spiral. The center was empty, so still felt unreal. The fog seemed to lift slightly, but the spiral remained, coiling into the distance endlessly. I exhaled. Footsteps echoed behind me. They were mine, or someone else's, or no one at all. I turned slowly. Shadows curled into the mist. The spiral hummed low, a vibration along my spine. I felt watched, followed, folded into the pattern. I stepped back. Time did not follow me evenly. Minutes stretched and snapped. The spiral whispered with movement. I could not tell if I had advanced or retraced steps. I left the center. Footsteps in the soil multiplied. Shadows lingered. The spiral stretched outward endlessly, green stalks bending in impossible arcs. I paused at the edge. Fog rolled softly along my boots. I felt its pulse against my chest, as if the spiral had reached out. Curiosity and dread pressed together. I wanted to leave, but also wanted to see what came next, if anything would break the curve of this living field. The spiral remained, breathing, watching, waiting, and I, alone, folded into the endless green, curving with it, never certain if I had entered or had always been here. The fog lay thick over the field. It smelled of damp soil and cold metal. The corn stalks bent slightly, almost leaning toward me, almost listening. A flicker appeared, pale, brief, like a candle caught in water. I froze. It vanished, then returned a heartbeat later. Each blink revealed something new, a shape impossible, alien, edges that bent wrong, arms that twisted like smoke. I blinked. The fog shifted like water, folding over itself, masking and revealing in turn. I took a cautious step. The soil pressed soft beneath my boots. The corn whispered around me, rustling with no wind. Each stalk seemed to twitch, to echo the shapes I glimpsed. The flicker came again, a pale light through gray haze. A figure crouched, too long, too thin, its head tilting impossibly. It vanished, then returned, further along the fog, mimicking my gaze, yet uncatchable. I shivered. The air pressed cold and wet against my skin. My breath rolled in clouds, thick as smoke between the stalks. Each exhale seemed to stir the fog, drawing more flickers, more impossible shapes. I walked slowly. The corn curved around me, forming corridors that changed with each step. The flickers darted ahead, then behind, always at the edge of vision. Eyes, if there were eyes, glimmered and disappeared. The field hummed low, a static vibration through the fog. I could feel it in my teeth, in the soles of my boots. The shapes bent toward the vibration, folding into angles that made my stomach lurch. I paused. The fog swirled around my ankles. Each blink of the flicker revealed something different. Sometimes a shadow stretched too far, sometimes a hand, or a shape that should not exist, then gone before I could focus. I tried to reach toward one. The air grew dense, pressing against my chest. The stalks shivered, as if warning me. The flicker vanished. Silence fell, heavy and complete. I listened. Nothing but the soft shifting of fog, the rustle of unseen stalks. Yet the memory of the shapes lingered. Impossible angles burned into my mind. I stepped forward again. The flicker returned, faint, green tinge this time. It hovered low, then high, then along the ground, always shifting, never still. Each blink a new impossibility. I realized the fog moved with them. It flowed like liquid, folding around the shapes, curling into the earth. The corn bent impossibly, leaning toward the blink, then straightening as though nothing had happened. I felt eyes on me, though no one stood there. Something in the fog watched, breathing softly, moving with the flickers, folding and unfolding in shapes my mind could not hold. The hum beneath the field thrummed softly, a pulse through soil and root. I could feel it in my chest, in the back of my neck. The fog quivered slightly, shadows shifting inside. I stepped back, then forward. The flickers continued, each blink a new wonder, a new terror. Impossible forms appeared, then dissolved into mist. I could not name them, could not describe them fully. I paused again. The fog swirled, folding into itself as if the field itself breathed. Curiosity pulled me forward. Fear pressed against my chest. The shapes lingered in memory long after the blink faded. I left the spiral of stalks. The fog thinned slightly. Yet the echoes of flickers remained, haunting corners of my vision. I could not tell if they watched me or if I had been part of the watching all along. The field settled into silence. The stalks bent gently with the windless air. The flickers had gone for now, but the pulse of shapes and fog remained, a rhythm I could not leave behind. Curiosity and fear merged, soft and heavy, as I stepped away. The corn whispered behind me. The mist shifted, and the flickers waited just beyond sight, just beyond reason. The fog rolled thick over the field. It smelled of wet earth and cold dew. The stalks pressed closer, bending just enough to block the sky. I could see the pale light struggling through, filtering in shards. Each step I took sank slightly into damp soil. Footsteps echoed around me, yet no one was there. The sound bounced off stalks, soft and hollow, like whispers trapped in clay. The corn moved without wind, a slow sway, almost deliberate. The stalks leaned inward, closing a wall around me. I could feel the gaps shrinking. Every rustle pressed in. I stopped, and the footsteps paused too. Silence fell, dense as fog, yet humming low in the bones. The smell of damp and decay thickened. I walked again, slow, cautious. The fog became heavier, pushing against my face. Each inhale tasted of cold metal and wet corn husk. My breath trailed like smoke between the stalks. Shadows stretched along the ground, leaning, bending. Every movement of mine was mirrored, yet slightly off. A hand of shadow brushed near my arm. Nothing solid, just a chill of presence. I tried to turn, but the stalks seemed to close faster. The air hummed, low, like teeth grinding quietly. The ground beneath me softened, as if swallowing my weight. The fog thickened into a wall. I pressed against it. It clung cold and wet, and I could hear shapes moving just beyond, rustling, breathing, whispering. The echoes of footsteps never ceased. The corn stalks leaned over me. Their leaves scraped softly, a friction like paper against skin. I could feel them brushing my shoulders, tickling, threatening. The field was alive in subtle ways, folding in around me. Every blink of pale light revealed something new. Shadows twisted impossibly along the rows. Shapes shifted where the fog curled, vanishing before I could name them. A hum beneath the soil, faint, kept time with my pulse. I stopped again. Silence, or its twin, pressured me. Footsteps echoed close, then receded. Then closer, always in rhythm with my own. I tried to lift my hand, to push the stalks back. They yielded just enough to let me pass, then close again with soft insistence. A chill ran along my spine. I could smell the decay of wet leaves, earthy and thick, clinging to my clothing. The fog pressed heavier still. I could see only a few feet ahead. Shadows danced in corners, bending the fog around them. The field had swallowed the horizon. The stalks whispered with every movement, soft, urgent, as if aware of my thoughts. I walked slowly, breathing in the fog, letting the damp weigh on my chest. The footsteps never stopped, always near, always echoing me. The corn leaned in tighter, leaves brushing my cheeks, shadows moving at impossible angles. The hum beneath the earth grew, a pulse through the soles of my boots. The fog clung to my hair, cooled my neck, and smelled of wet iron. Each stalk seemed to whisper, unintelligible, urgent, pressing against my awareness. I turned slightly. The fog shifted with me, closing again as though alive. I could feel the field breathing around me, thick, slow, deliberate. The echoes of footsteps mirrored mine exactly, then vanished, leaving only cold silence. I stopped completely. The fog pressed against my chest. The stalks leaned closer, blocking light, sound, and movement. I could smell the decay of earth, feel the damp on my skin, hear the faint hum beneath. The footsteps faded, but only slightly. The cornfield had become a wall, impenetrable, infinite. I stood alone, breathing, surrounded. Dread settled in the bones, deep, steady, absolute. The stalks pressing around me. The fog held tight. The field whispered softly. The echoes of steps lingered, then silence. And I was left in it, alone, enclosed and listening. The fog clung to the field like wet cloth. It smelled of cold earth and decaying leaves. The air pressed against my skin, damp and thick. I could hear my own breath, ragged and slow, blending with a low hum beneath the soil. A pale light appeared above the corn. It pulsed faintly, then brighter, like it was breathing with me. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, and the light pulsed in perfect rhythm. Shadows twisted along the stalks. They moved unnaturally, slipping against the fog, then retreating. Each blink of the light revealed new angles, new distortions in the mist. The hum grew louder, soft at first, then pressing, vibrating through my bones. I tried to breathe normally, but the fog tasted metallic, and my chest tightened with its pressure. I stepped forward, the stalks brushing against my arms. They moved almost as if alive, leaning away from the light, but closing in from the edges. The ground beneath my boots felt thin, like it might vanish if I paused too long. The light pulsed again, brighter, warmer, and strange. Shadows fled into the mist, bending around each other, as if afraid of the glow. Every step I took, the hum deepened, resonating in my skull. I reached out, and the air shimmered against my fingers. The fog shifted like liquid, parting and curling back. The smell of wet corn mixed with something electric, a faint ozone tang that made my hair stand on end. The light hovered, growing impossibly larger, yet never closer. It pulsed with me, measured each beat of my heart, then stretched and expanded, casting the fog in green-gold shadows. I could feel the world thinning around me. Shapes in the mist wavered, edges fraying like fabric. The field hummed beneath my feet, and a cold pressure brushed my neck. I was alone, yet everything watched. A stalk bent near me, its leaf brushing my cheek. It quivered, shivering against the pull of the light. I could hear whispers now, in the hum, indecipherable, urgent, like voices trying to break through fog. The shadows twisted and fled, running into corners of the mist, sliding over one another in impossible ways. Every echo of their movement made the hum climb higher, pressing into my ears, threatening to drown thought. I tried to look away, but the light drew my gaze. Its pulse became a rhythm, an endless thrum, and I realized it was tied to me, to the beat of my own heart. The fog shifted and flowed, and for a moment I felt weightless, like I might float with it. Then the hum became deafening. My feet ached against the soil, my lungs burned with cold air. Shadows twisted violently, bending around the stalks in impossible angles. The mist seemed alive, folding over itself, covering the field in waves of pale, trembling light. I stumbled back, but the field closed around me, the stalks whispering against my arms. The hum vibrated in my chest, my teeth, my eyes, like a living pulse. Every step I took matched the light, yet it never drew nearer, never left me alone. And then stillness. The shadows froze. The hum lingered, a constant undercurrent, soft and insistent. The light hovered, pulsing faintly, a last signal suspended above the field. I could feel the isolation pressed down. No one was here, nothing was solid, and yet I was watched, tied to the rhythm, unable to move freely. The fog swirled, curling like smoke, casting the field in trembling patterns of green gold. I breathed, slow and shallow. The hum receded slightly, but the pulse remained, alive in my veins. Shadows lingered at the edges, unmoving, and I realized I was alone, yet not alone, connected to something vast, unknown. The light pulsed one final time. The stalks quivered, the fog shifted, and the hum became a whisper. I could feel the world thinning, the line between reality and this place blurring. I stood, frozen, heart beating with the signal, watching the glow hover, and knowing the field would not let me leave entirely. And in that trembling, suspended silence, I felt both wonder and fear entwined and utterly isolated.